welcome back to the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast. So this episode is premiering in December, and honestly, gardening may be the very last thing on your mind right now. I know if you're like me and live in a climate similar to mine, I put the garden to bed and I am pretty much checked out for a while at least. But I wanted to invite you back into your garden, at least mentally, for just a little while today so we can talk about seed starting, because believe it or not, actually, or maybe you do believe it, it's going to be here before you know it. And actually now is the time when a lot of seed companies are going to be sending catalogs. You're going to start needing to make plans. I know I love to plan all my gardens out by the wood stove on a cold winter night. And so I want to help you get ready for that, even though a lot of us are moving more towards the holiday frame of mind. So in the past, I've talked on the podcast here about the benefits of starting your own seeds. It's one of the most cost-saving things you can do on the homestead, especially when you consider that plants like tomato starts or pepper starts, they're, sometimes $4 to $5 a piece. And if you want to grow any quantity of those, it adds up really fast. So starting your own seeds can save you a ton of money. The only problem is that there's a lot of variables involved. And I find that when I talk to people, a lot of them run into issues with starting seeds at home. So today I am so thrilled to have a seed starting expert with us. Shawn McLoughlin is one of the founders of allaboutgardening.com. He and his family live in Texas and have a massive garden and food forest on their small property. I can't wait to talk more about that. And his company, All About Gardening, got my attention last year when I was looking for more durable, more sustainable seed trays. And then I stumbled into what he and his wife offer and learned a lot in the process. So he is going to join us today, share all of his wisdom. Welcome, Shawn. I can't wait for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. My wife and I have been watching you for a long time, and we've met each other at some of the Homesteaders of America events. So I was excited to be here and talk about seed starting. I could talk about seed
Yes.
starting all day long. And you're
Yes.
totally right. This is the time of year when we're absolutely getting ready for seed starting in our zone. We're down in South Central Texas. And so for us, we're probably going to start seeding in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh,
We're actually
wow.
setting up a whole, yeah, because if
Blows
anything
my mind.
needs to be, yeah, well, it's because our zone 9A last frost date is sometimes May, or sorry, sometimes February. And so if we don't get that late freeze, a lot of times we're going to try to cheat the system and put stuff in the ground like February 1st. And then if we do get caught with a freeze, then we've got backup seedlings. But so we always try to get a super early start. But we've already purchased all of our seeds, and we can't wait for spring. This is the gardening dead zone right now that we can't wait to
Yeah.
get out there. So for us, we're actually still harvesting from fall. So right now we're in harvest
Wow.
mode. Yeah,
Okay.
we're taking green beans off plants just the other day. So
That's a really fast
um,
turnaround, though, like where you're still harvesting and then you're getting ready to plant again in February.
so yeah, for your zone, you've got a dead time when you're not growing. Our dead time is really the peak of summer when it's
Okay.
just too hot to grow things, and then the very peak of winter. And in our South Central Texas climate, we really only have about 2 months out of the year where we can't have something in the ground, or that things really, really struggle in the ground, be it too cold or too hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It just,
you're right. It is
yeah.
it is a quick turnaround.
Yeah, it fascinates me. And I'm so glad we're recording this now because, well, we were talking when we were together at Homesteaders of America in October. And I was like, come on the podcast. And I'm like, maybe I'll have you on in March to talk about seed starting. And you're like, I think that's not going to work. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, not everyone lives in the Arctic like I
Yeah.
do. So I just always forget. So I'm glad we're doing it now. I think it's super timely. Um, yeah. So
Yeah,
I
I mean,
guess,
if you're in South Florida, you never stop growing.
yeah.
And where we are, it's really a dual season garden for sure. And then as you get up farther north, so there's just and we're you mentioned us all about the garden. It's allaboutthegarden.com. You mentioned that, and we see a swath of everyone. And so sometimes when we're providing guidance, they think we're crazy because we're like we're out here to plant our plants. They're
Yeah.
huddled up for winter. But so yeah, it's a wide swath of gardeners to be talking to. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. So start us off. Give us a little background on your homestead gardens. I'm intrigued. I know you said when we were talking back and forth via email, you have a third of an acre garden plot. So you basically have an acre homestead and a third of it's
Yeah.
garden. Tell us, that's impressive. Tell me more.
Yeah, so I'm a dad, a husband. We have four kiddos, and we live in, like I said, South Central Texas. And I started gardening like the first time when I was a little kid with my grandpa. I have super fond memories, so I kind of was just becoming a grandfather gardener just early in life. And so we started really hobby gardening when we still lived in the suburbs and doing as much as we could and did a water collection system. That's about 10 years ago. And so over the course of that 10-year period, just being a hobbyist gardener became, it's a hobby run absolutely amok, where, we've gone from the garden hobbyist to a studied practitioner of some well-developed garden methods. Be those a lot of what we do revolves around, back to Eden, if you want to go way back, to some of those methods, and square foot gardening, and most recently things like no-till gardening, no-dig gardening. Charles Dowding is a big influence of ours. And then now I'm really interested in regenerative agriculture and soil biology. It's just all about soil biology, which is really the basis behind the no dig gardening. And that just has grown over the years. We purposely moved out from the suburb to do kind of what we considered like a half homestead. And so we live in a small town. We don't live out in the middle of the country. We live in a small town, and we have about an acre in this old house that's built in 1865. But we just saw this giant yard, giant compared to what we had in the suburbs. And we said, that's the spot we're going to be able to start our garden. And we just grew it little by little over the years. We've been here 7 years now. And so the first garden went in. I think I basically took a bunch of ivy off the side of the house, and then we put in a garden. And it wasn't it was the first of many. And every year it just kind of gets quite a bit bigger. We probably have a third of an acre under cultivation between we have a raised bed garden system. We've just started a new victory garden, and then we have a food forest, and we have about
Mm.
60 varieties of fruit bearing plants in the food forest. And then, at any given time in the garden, the proper vegetable garden, we probably have about 30 to 100 varieties, depending on what time of year it is.
It's so impressive. That is so impressive. And I'm right with you on the soil biology. Anyone who's listened to this podcast this year know I've turned into a complete nerd over that. So I can't stop talking about it. Everyone's like, what are you excited about right now? I'm like, soil microbes.
Yeah, the
That's
dorkiest
the
level of
dorkiest
gardening.
level.
I'm like this far away from buying a microscope so I can look
Yeah.
at my own soil microbes. That's how you've come full circle.
Yes.
Um, but kind of what drove it for us is Jen, is my wife's name is Jen. She runs all about the garden. We just became really passionate about growing our own food. We just saw a lot of weird stuff, and without getting too political, we just wanted to have control. It's not less, it's less so about being self-sufficient because we're not on solar power. We don't have a well, right? And so we're still dependent on a lot of the systems, but we're taking back what we can, and we have great control over this incredible food source. And so that's just become like a driving factor. We have a goal of trying to basically have about 80% of everything that we consume comes from this spot. And we want to
Mm.
show people how to do that where they're at, whether that is a decent sized yard, if that's all you have. I mean, showing folks that you can do this. And so we're lucky to have chickens. We're allowed to have 10 chickens within the city limits. And so we have 10 chickens, and then we have our kids signed up for like 4-H club. So then we can do some other things. And so we're trying to basically produce as much of our own food as possible. And we did it step by step. We're still not there. We got a lot of ways to go, but we basically looked at our grocery list and said, number one, what can we live without? And then number two, what can we make on our own? What
Yeah.
can we start to replace? So like I can stack up all the tomato product I need for a whole year in a spring season, and that's off the grocery list. And so we've kind of done that little by little, one item at a time, and that the group of what we're now producing has gotten a lot bigger, and the group that we're buying has gotten a lot smaller.
I love it. And I honestly, I really love that we have more folks like you coming up in the homestead movement, because people need to see you don't have to have 50 acres to do this. Not everyone can have 50 acres. We can't give 50 acres to everyone in the country. There's not enough
Right.
room. So like we have to figure out how to do this with our food supply issues, like you mentioned. Like people need to figure out how to do this in backyards and on 1 acre plots and on half acre plots. And so I think people like you are so inspiring in how you've utilized what you have I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's super important, now more than ever that people grow their own food, and it's a bit of a lost art. I mentioned Victory Garden, and I'm all into that right now, and so I was doing a little bit of research during World War II, which is when that term became popularized. There were 18 million gardens in the United States, and 12 million of them were in cities. And so
Yes.
they're exactly what we're talking about today. And we used to have a whole culture that understood how to do that, and now we're trying to recreate it really. And I think a lot of folks are resonating with that story. And so we've become super passionate about teaching people how to grow their own food.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay, so seed starting.
Yeah.
I think most people know why they should start seeds, why it's cool and important and cost effective. But for someone listening who is still on the fence, they're just like, it seems like a lot of work. I have to start months ahead of time. I have to babysit them. Give us like your 2-minute elevator pitch on why you should start your own seeds.
Um, yeah, so I want to have control over what varieties I'm planting. I want to have a diversity of varieties. If I'm going to the big box store, I'm only going to get three different types of tomatoes, and most of them are going to be hybrid, and there's thousands of tomatoes. Um, the quality and taste of heirloom non-GMO seeds is completely different from what else you're going to get. And so, you know, the whole process of seed starting really starts with seed selection. I can recommend where we go, or I can share where we go. But what we're really looking for is non-GMO heirloom seeds, so that we can also do our own seed collection and have true to form plants when we are seed harvesting. When we're doing seed collecting. Um, did I answer your question?
Yes, I think that's great.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that's awesome.
So yeah, I mean, starting your own seeds, other than the money, is really being able to control what your end product is, without being pigeonholed into what's available at the store. And
Okay.
really in the
Yeah.
grocery aisle too. I mean, if you think about the number of things in the grocery aisle compared to the number of things that we have in our garden, you do not have a breadth of variety of this nutrient base that you can pull from anymore. And then we really used to have this. I mean, you used to have a local nutrient rich food that was specific to your area, and that's what you ate, and that turns out to be the best thing that you can grow. And the best thing for your body is when there's a reason you're in this environment, and what comes out of this environment is well suited toward you, and there's really no way to duplicate that without growing it on your own. It's kind of like it's really good to have local honey. It's really
Yes.
good to have local vegetables, and the more local, the better. And if it's in your yard, that your yard knows what you need. When you
Yep.
walk around in your yard, if you can have a nutrient deficiency, and your garden will supply that for you because you're within that environment. It's a pretty amazing thing. It's you
Yeah.
back to the microbiome and soil biology stuff. It's just the deepest well. So
Yes, it is.
there's
You know, a rabbit
there's
hole.
15
Yes.
podcasts there, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a heck of a rabbit hole.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so I've got some talking points. We can talk about seeds. We can talk about the germination process, which is something that people kind of get hung up on.
Yeah.
And then we'll go into some of the tools that we use, the seed starting trays, and some of the do's and don'ts, and how to avoid mistakes within the whole care process that you mentioned.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just take us through. Dive in. Go for it.
Sure. So after seed selection, we like I said, we love non-GMO, and preferably open pollinated and heirloom. So we're getting pretty specific. If we can be picky, why not? And the seeds aren't any more expensive when you're buying the best seeds, really, than not. So I go for the best. Uh, the next thing to consider is basically like, what are you going to put your seeds in, which is, I call soil, or the soil medium that you're going to use. And probably the most important thing is that consistency is key. So whether you use your own compost, if you're comfortable with if you're producing your own compost, or you're comfortable with that, then you could use that. But what we really want is consistency, both consistency in texture and consistency in quality, in aeration, consistency in nutrient base. And the reason I'm looking for consistency is because I want a repeatable process with as few variables as possible, right? So that when I do run into some issues, that there's very few things that it could be. Usually it's because I didn't water enough, and that's why they've
Hmm.
flopped over, right? And so if I can eliminate some of the unknowns, whatever is in the soil medium is going to be reflected in the plants, and I want to have a better understanding what that is. And so we tend to use, and this is great for beginner gardener too, we tend to use a store-bought seed starting mix. In fact, we pretty much use it exclusively, even though we make our own compost. If you were to use your own compost, I would I would highly recommend sifting it. A great way to do that is you take a 2x4, cut it into four 24-inch sections, nail it together into a square, and then attach hardware cloth on the back of it. That's the half-inch by half-inch stuff. And shake that compost, that store-bought compost or your own compost through that sifter so that you can get a finer texture because tiny little roots can't hold on to even a half-inch chunk of wood, and that reduces root ball density, which makes it more likely to have transplant shock later. And so consistency is key. For that reason, we use a mix of coconut coir, peat moss, and vermiculite. So vermiculite for water retention and coconut coir for drainage and peat moss for a little bit of nutrient. There's lots of if folks have a problem, there's a whole peat-free movement, which I totally get.
Yes.
But there's also some great peat-free soil starting mixes. The key is just being able to use something that you know is going to be consistent every time. What we found with using compost as a medium sometimes is each batch is a bit different because it's coming seasonally out of the garden typically.
Hmm.
And so that that may not be the best following compost for the next season in certain cases. It could be a great compost for your spring garden because it came out of your spring garden, but may not be the best for your fall garden or the garden in the middle. And so we just found with compost that there was a lot of unknowns. Sometimes it was too woody and it would retain a ton of water, and there's just really no way to stop it from becoming a water battery. So unless you're really good with your own composting, uh, or you have a very well-known, well-sourced prepackaged compost and you sift it, I tend to use a seed starting mix.
Okay.
That will remove a lot of pitfalls. And we find that with our spring garden, basically about 35 because of the seed starting trays we use. The modules are small on purpose. They're soil efficient. We find that about 35 bucks will get us through an entire season. So basically 35 bucks in the fall, 35 bucks in the spring, and that's our entire year. So we basically that's a $70 input plus the seeds is our cost. Uh, you know, does that
Okay.
make sense?
It does. Yes. A couple questions on this because I have gone back and forth over the years. And I think a lot of people get confused when you go to the garden store because there are the seed starting mixes and then there's the potting soil and then there's potted plant mixes and there's raised bed mixes and there's like a ton of options. So we don't have to
Hmm.
go into all of those for every type of gardening, but specifically when we're talking about starting seeds. So you're getting like the seed starting medium that's it's not potting soil, but it says seed starting medium on the
It says
front.
seed starting mix, yeah. And we
Okay.
actually use like believe it or not, and this one is very readily available. We use Jiffy organic seed starting mix.
Okay.
And there's other good. We live in a small town, and so it's easy for us to go grab it, and we don't have as many sources. Amazon obviously has a ton of sources. You're looking for something that has aeration and water retention and some amount of nutrient, right? And you want
Yes.
it to be super consistent. And the finer, the better. What we like about that seed starting mix is it's a very fine grained, very, very fine textured product. And it's the same every single time. It's also sterile.
Okay. And so I will admit, I do not, I use potting soil to start my seeds.
It's okay.
Is that
It's
okay?
totally fine.
Okay.
It is,
Is it?
no, it is okay.
Okay.
The why it's funny, when I first started gardening, I got, some seeds, some potting mix, and it had the little white balls. And I was like, who in the world would put styrofoam
I know
in
it does
there?
look like
That's
styrofoam. Yeah.
It's vermiculite, and that's
Yes.
great
Yes.
for. It took me a while to figure that out. I was like, I'm not putting styrofoam in my garden.
Yeah.
That's vermiculite, and it's great for water retention. It's basically a water battery, as long as it has the qualities that it's finely textured, that you can understand how water travels through it and how long water lasts, and that may just be you have built that knowledge based on that item. That's fine. That is consistency. That's the consistency we're looking for. If that process works for you, use it over and over and over again. So when
Hmm.
something goes wrong, you know it's not that one thing that you've used 20 times. And
Yes.
if that's your perfect compost and you're the compost queen or the compost king, great, use it and use it all
Okay.
the time. So that
Yes.
the goal is just consistency. And for us, the quickest and easiest way, and for a lot of gardeners, the quickest and easiest way is to grab a seed starting mix.
And the difference, though, like if we were, why they have, like maybe why they created seed starting mixes or why they would be preferable, is it, I'm assuming it's finer texture and just like, because I know that the potting soil mixes can be like there's more chunks in it sometimes. Sometimes I have to kind of
Yeah.
sift through. Is that what the big difference would be?
Yeah, so one thing that I would say for potting mixes is that they're specifically formulated to allow water to move through very, very quickly.
Hmm.
And to a certain extent, it's depending on what you're using. So if folks are going with these like 4-inch pots, which a lot of times they do, they'll reuse the things from the store because why not?
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of reasons why not to, but that's a pretty significant amount of soil that you're then placing into the garden that has a different texture than the soil in the garden itself.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And so you've
Yes.
got this potting soil that you're then putting into your garden bed, and that's a completely different soil medium. And you normally, if you're using it in a very small module tray, so it's a, like the ones that we have, so it's a very small amount of that potting soil, it's not going to make an appreciable difference. But if you're using a larger size, you're going to end up with pockets of your garden that have different aeration and water flow. And so I'm good with it as long as it's on a small level. And it's going to work. I guess probably one of the things I should say in the beginning of a talk like this is that there's a lot of info here, and I wouldn't want anybody to get overwhelmed with it. Instead, I tend to think of it like, you could be like me in high school and pass with a 70, but if I had put some best practices, if you just add a
Yeah.
point here and a point there throughout the process, it adds up, and now you're in the 90 range, and now you're having a whole lot more success.
Yeah.
And so not a lot of this isn't just super hard, fast rules. It's not, you don't have to be legalistic about it. Seeds love to grow, you know.
Yes.
That's what
They want to
seeds
grow.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll grow with or without you in many cases. But if with these best practices, if we think of them just as beneficial add-ons to a process we're already doing, we can get ourselves up into those, A plus kind of levels. And
Yes.
so as we talk about some of this stuff, very very little of it is, hard and fast. You got to do it this way, but we're really just talking about best practices. So we'll try, hopefully folks can just kind of pull things here and there to add to their
Yeah.
own.
Hey, friend, I'm interrupting this episode for just a second to give a shout out to our sponsor, Genuine Beef. Now, this is actually my beef company, the one that my husband and I started a number of years ago to bring our grass finished Wyoming beef straight to your doorstep. And I know that whenever we start to shift into this fall and winter season, I get the very primal urge to stock up on food. And I know many of you feel that same way. So we have put together a freezer filler special to help you do just that. You're going to get 4 of our most popular beef roasts, the ones that are great for crock pots and those cozy winter meals, as well as 3 pounds of our 90-10 ground beef. We're going to put it all in a bundle and give it to you for 15% off while supplies last. Now, we can ship this to anywhere in the continental US. We do second day air. We put a lot of dry ice in there, so it'll get to your doorstep safe and sound. And if you want to grab a box or 2 or 3, head on over to theprairiehomestead.com/freezer to grab your bundle. And I'll go ahead and drop that link in the show notes too. Now, back to our episode. And that's my goal. I think you nailed it. Is like I've grown hundreds of pounds of tomatoes or whatever with just fumbling through, you know, putting them
Uh-huh.
in the windowsill, random potting soil, random containers. But I think for people who are ready to really understand what's going on and get a little more
Sure.
granular and really up level, I think you said it well. This is that deep dive. You don't have to do all this, but when you know it,
Right.
knowledge is power. It's going to help you be better, do
If
better, have better
Yeah,
results.
if you do a few things well, it's really there's going to be a major difference. And especially if you get into the realm where you are trying to make a move where you're actually going to get serious about producing your own food, this is when you really need to start to dial in your processes. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, the seeds love to grow, but it's if you want to get high production, especially, you need to understand what a good seedling looks like and what good seeds look like and how they should germinate and what to not do, and so that you can get up to that next level for sure, so that you really have consistent results in the garden. Um, I guess the next thing probably is there's quite a few tools, not a ton, but there's some like to have and some must haves within the seed starting process, and we can kind of jump into some of those.
Can I ask one more question back on the soil,
Oh, of
just
course.
before we go into the tools? So you said you start with a seed starting medium, and then you mentioned compost, and then you mentioned coconut coir, peat moss, vermiculite mix. Would that be an either or? Like if you were potting up, are you potting up into straight compost or the coir mixture, or where do those other pieces come in?
Yeah, so for folks that are going through a process where you're kind of starting small, and I always recommend starting as small as possible, in the smallest module that you can grow that seed in, and then potting up in a reasoned, like a staged way, as opposed to, I don't want to go from a tiny module up to like a big one. And
Mhm.
so it's depending on how long you need to be in the tray, you're gonna need to amend. if you're starting with like a seed starting mix, it's going to be nutrient poor. Maybe that compost has an advantage in that case because it's more nutrient dense, but the downside is a lack of consistency. When we do pot up, we're then amending with a liquid based fertilizer, which I will get into more of that detail
Okay.
later. But I tend to want to pot up into something that's as close to what it's going to be on outside. So I would I would prefer compost over potting soil if I'm potting up. Potting
Okay.
soil is specifically for things that live in pots. I mean, that's what it's best for. You can use it. I mean, we use it for other things too, but that's what it's best for. It's going to be in a pot for a really long time, or if it's going to live permanently in a pot, then I'm using potting soil. If it's going to be in a garden, then I'm trying to use garden soil, especially when I start to
Okay.
get into a much larger potting size. Um, if I'm starting with a seed starting mix, like you can totally go into a different medium. Just I want that medium to get closer and closer. As the longer the plant stays in the tray, the more I want that soil to begin to look like what it is outside. Because
Okay. That makes sense.
we're building habit in that plant, and the more I can match what it's going to really live in, the better. And
Okay.
so it's for a gardener up north who's doing a lot of potting up, just keep in mind that I want to start moving into something that looks more and more like what I have outside. And so maybe that would look like taking that coconut coir that I started and then mixing it 50-50 with like a compost or a garden soil. So it still has a lot of those aeration and drainage properties, and it's getting closer to what it's going to be in. Does
Okay, I've
that
never
make
thought of it like
sense?
that. Yeah, that does make sense. I've always just been like, well, garden, here's a bunch of new stuff, random stuff. So that makes sense that you're trying to match it as much as possible.
Yeah, so it's a different look for somebody in a warmer climate where I'm a lot closer to the planting date in some cases
Hmm.
than you will be, or somebody in Florida like zone 11. I mean, all they're doing is starting to consistently start seeds and then get them out in the garden as fast as possible because the weather's fantastic, right?
Yes,
In your
yes.
case, you need to be a bit of a doctor about walking the seedlings through the process, and kind of
Mm,
somewhere in between.
yes, okay.
Certainly in the winter, we're doing a lot of early prep, and so we do a lot of potting up. In the fall, it's already nice outside, and I'm worried about heat. Like I'm waiting for the summer heat to tail, and I don't have to spend a ton of time in the trays in fall. I spend quite a bit less time in the trays,
Okay,
and so
yeah.
I'm going from the smallest module directly into the ground. Uh, but but that seedling hasn't had a lot of time to become stuck in its ways, I guess. Whereas yours, after it's been in a tray for maybe 8 weeks and you're really trying to get an early start and you've got plants that are this tall, that plant is kind of set in its ways. And so I want to have as little difference in whatever it's in today than it's going to be in for its life. Does that make sense?
Okay, that does make sense. Yes, that's great information. Okay, awesome. Thank you for addressing that. Okay,
Yeah.
on to tools. Take us through tools.
Yeah. So I'd say probably the number one, well, they're all pretty important, but warming mats, lights, and seed starting trays. I mean, something that I can actually put my seeds in, whatever that looks like. I'd say that I'd consider a warming mat a must-have, and there's few things that I'll say that about. And I'll get into the nitty-gritty of why, and we can look at germination rates and that kind of stuff. But the brand we use is Vivosun. They cost about $20. We've used them for, I think we've had the oldest ones we have are now 7 years old and they're still kicking. And so we started with one and now we got a stack of them. So warming mat is a must. It's going to dramatically increase germination rates, and there's a lot of good reasons we can get into later. Um, Lights are a big one, and for the folks that are starting out, I'd say no, your kitchen window isn't enough light.
Yes, that's such a
Uh,
devastating
it
statement,
is. Why
Shawn.
can't I just put?
You're
I know.
breaking hearts right now.
Right, that was my whole plan this season.
Yes.
Somebody out there is grabbing something you know yeah, so no, that's not enough light. So seedlings, they really need a ton of sunlight. You either need a greenhouse with full sun, and a greenhouse brings its own challenges because
Yes, it
greenhouses
does.
have pests, and greenhouses can have inconsistent temperatures, and so or you need artificial grow lights. For best results, those lights should really be full spectrum LED grow lights. I've seen, some people have some success with other types of lights, but that's the full spectrum LED lights are really the best. Putting it next to the window isn't going to be enough light. The seedlings are going to get super leggy. Leggy
Hmm.
is basically when you have a long stem with a real spindly and it wants to fall over. And a leggy seedling is going to be a weak seedling. And it's going to have to face a lot of stuff once it goes outside. You want it to be as strong as possible. So uh, I consider lights either you're providing full sun via a greenhouse or you're going to have some kind of artificial light. But you start small, you see what works for you, and then you kind of keep adding to the system. Ours is now an embarrassing level of complexity
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to get to, but ultimately that's where you're going to end up if you're really going to pursue it. But the great thing about gardening is you get to be at whatever level you want to. If you want one bed and that's all you can handle, go for it and make it the best one you've ever had. Um, the next one, do you have any questions on lights? Because
Yes, I
that's
do.
kind of a
Actually,
big topic.
it is a big topic. We don't have to, I mean, I just know I have a lot of people who get stuck on that because they'll go, okay, so here's maybe I've caused part of the problem because I have fluorescent shop lights we got at Lowe's like, I don't know, 8 years
Hmm.
ago. And I've been using them every year. They work great.
Edit
I put
that
them on
part out.
that's bad.
No, I said
Okay.
edit this
No.
part out. No, no,
Okay.
I'm kidding you. No,
Okay.
be honest.
Be honest.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So people see that I have it on my blog and I talk about it, and then they go to try to find them, and then they get stuck, and I don't know if they have those kind anymore. They're like T3, just like fluorescent
Uh-huh.
lights.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then they go and there's
That's
like, is that okay? Those
yeah,
kind?
yeah, it
Okay.
is. They, there's whole kinds of, you've got like commercial lighting, uh, folks with long row houses that are doing indoor, you know, seed propagation and they're fulfilling nurseries. And there's a ton of traction for those I think it's like T4, T5 now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Something
don't,
like
I
that.
don't
Yeah.
use those. The
Okay.
real ones, the ones that are really good are really expensive.
Yes.
I've used a bunch of different types, and the ones that just give me the most consistent results are full spectrum LED grow lights, specifically grow
They're
lights.
specific, and are those a little pricier? Because what
Hmm.
I've had people say, they read my blog post and then they go try to find them at their Lowe's or Home Depot, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is
Uh-huh.
outrageous."
So,
But
so I just bought 4 foot long, 80-watt grow lights. So they're at the home gardener level. They're not at the commercial level. Um, and they were about 41 bucks a piece, and I got
okay,
5 of them. So it is kind of an investment, but I could have started with one. It's just I just made Jen like a giant seed starting station. We're really
sure.
excited about it. I'll show it at some point. So I'm revamping, but up until now, I've had smaller grow lights, and I just kind of kept adding them one at a time. If I was starting out, I could probably get a $20 grow light, a $40 grow light, a $20 warming mat, and 20 bucks worth of seed starting trays, and then all I need is seeds and soil.
Okay,
And so
okay.
I'm, my first foray into this, if I'm dipping my toes in the water, is about 80 bucks, right?
Yes.
To get a decent garden started, depending on how big you want to go.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I feel like I've confused people because they can't find what I have, and then it's like this whole convoluted. I'm like, it's super cheap to set up seed starting, and they're like, not with these lights. So thank you for that clarity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a ton on Amazon. It's a bit of a you got to be careful, read the reviews. The
yeah.
ones that I just got are called Sunco. And I spent way too long looking at lights, I'll admit. So,
Yeah.
I
This is your
I went
thing,
through a
though.
whole
It's all
half
right.
day. Yeah,
This
yeah.
is your thing.
I went through a whole half day. Yeah. But those are the ones I ended up on. And I think we talked about this before we started recording, but I'll build a resource page for folks that are looking at this and try to give a lot of this stuff. We'll just leave the highlights for them. So if they need some guides, then they can walk through it.
Awesome. That's going to be super helpful. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Next on your
So
tool list. So, sorry, go ahead.
right. So the big one and the one this one's near and dear to us, that is seed starting trays. And when I said the hobby ran amok, basically I got so into gardening that I ended up starting an entire business about revolving around seed starting trays because I was so tired of the 72 cell trays from the big box store.
Yes.
And so when I
Yes.
mentioned seed trays, and that's like our wheelhouse. That's what we sell at allaboutthegarden.com. We have 13 different seed trays on our site for various reasons, ranging from like 77 cells to 15. But really, of those, most of our garden, because of the zone that we're in, go into two different sizes. That's a 60 cell tray and a 40 cell tray. And so when I'm talking about trays, I'm talking about this kind of thing where it's got individual modules. I'm going to fill this thing with soil, and that's what I'm going to put my seeds into. These are super, super durable. Um, wherever, I guess the different tray sizes all have different uses. Like I said, we really only use like a couple because of where we are. You could probably use a smaller one to start out with, and then you'd pot up into something like as big as we have some that are like kind of root trainers. We have some that are 15 cells that are almost the size. You can see how
Oh,
deep
wow.
that one
Those are
is.
huge. Okay.
That yeah,
Yep.
it's 28 cells. Like you can do cuttings in the tray like that. We have one that's a 15 cell that is almost the size as a of a 4x4 pot. So that
Okay.
standard 4 inch, it's 3.75 inches uh, top. Anyway, 3.75 inches and about the same depth, and so that way you have like 15 4 inch
Mhm.
pots in one hand as you're walking out to the garden instead of having all those individual pots. Um, and I'd say like no matter wherever you get them, whether there's when we first started the business, this was impossible to find. I mean, it was just those
Yes.
72 cell flimsy trays at the store. There's a few other folks out there, and what the takeaway should just be, I would highly recommend a rigid, very sturdy seed starting tray. Again, I talk a lot about consistency. It goes back to being consistent. I want a repeatable process. It's not because if I mess up, it's not going to be because of this tray that I've used 15 times. The
Yep.
ones that we have are UV stable, polypropylene, food safe, and they are designed to last for 15 years. I have a funny video where I actually ran one over with a car, and it was the
Nice.
joke of the video was I was supposed to, put it through the paces and it could make it, and but don't run it over with your car because it was
Fair
going to get
enough.
smashed. But
Yeah.
but I ran it over with the car and it didn't break, so it's still usable. So the joke didn't work, but it still ended up being funny.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, you've used a bunch of different things. I see a lot people will use toilet paper trays or
Yeah.
you use paper egg cartons. Reuse what you have, and I totally get it, and I'm okay with it. Um, you're introducing variables like you might have glues or dyes within those things, and if you put a seedling in red dye, it's going to die. And so if you've got red writing on the back of an egg
Mm.
carton, that red dye is going to seep into it. It's going to get pulled in by the water, and red dye is a killer for plants.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can, yeah. So you just got to watch out. I just prefer to not have the variables that I have to worry about, so I can just work a simple process and get consistent results. You also get like inconsistent water retention, which is
Yes.
also a problem with some of those like um, paper pots that you put the plant into and then just put it directly into the garden. You never have to take it out of the pot. There's a lot of water retention inconsistencies because of the way that product's made. And it also causes lots of root binding. They say it grows right through,
Yes.
but roots have a hard time
It
making it
doesn't.
through it, especially in the early stages. And so, again, the takeaway is just whatever you do, find a super rigid cell, multi-cell module tray. So uh, basically, no matter what, wherever you get it, it needs to be consistent, repeatable. It has to produce firm root balls. It needs to promote feeder roots rather than tap roots, and we'll get into some of that as we talk about how to use the trays. But and you have to be able to remove the seeds without transplant shock.
Hmm.
The seedlings need to come out of the tray easily without any stress. And that's why I rarely say never. I would tell people without question, never use those 72 cell trays from the big box store. The ones that come in the 10 by 20
Are
format.
they like the little? They're the tiny, tiny ones. Like they're just a like right. I'm trying to
Yeah,
visual
they're
because
pretty
I've tried
small,
those.
and
They're very yeah.
they're pretty small. And you I think they're like $9. They're not even that cheap.
Yeah.
And they come with a 10 by 20-inch tray underneath, and the module cell tray goes on the inside. And then sometimes they come with a little dome over it, right? And that's kind
Yeah.
of like the seed starter kit. But that's kind of the worst. That's the worst process that you could ever go through. I think that's probably a gardener killer right there because
Yeah.
people use that product and then they think it's them. I'm just a bad gardener. I don't have a green thumb. And really the product, there's a bunch of terrible practices built into that item. And nobody knows, why would you know not to use it, or you have to use it very, very carefully. So I
Yes.
tell people stay away from that completely. The last tool in the arsenal that we use, that I would say this is definitely a like to have, and you can do this on your own with other ways, but is a bottom watering tray. We use a bottom watering tray under every seed starting tray. Um, we have the benefit of having a ton of them, but this is what that looks like, and basically the tray sits inside that bottom watering tray so that I can water from the bottom. Um,
Okay.
you can accomplish, so I definitely recommend bottom watering. Um, but you can still bottom water without a bottom watering tray. Like you could do that with a cookie sheet. You can drop a
Okay.
tray into a cookie sheet with water on it. And then you just want to remove the tray out of the water after it's wicked up the water. So I do recommend
Yes.
bottom watering. I do recommend bottom watering trays. They're easy and they'll last forever. So,
Okay.
and so the
I have,
takeaway
yeah.
basically, go ahead.
Go ahead. Finish your tip. I have
Yeah, I
questions.
was going to
So
say
finish your thought.
basically the takeaway, just to simplify that is, you know, you would really love to have a warming mat. You should probably have one. You need a great light source and you need just high quality, rigid module trays for best results. Again, all this stuff is about best results, not must-haves, not have-to-dos.
Yes. Okay. Are you ready for my questions? I have some questions. This
Hmm.
is what I've been waiting to talk about. So I will be honest, when I first found your trays, or you sought me out, or I sought you out, I can't remember how it happened initially. I was just looking for a way to have a more sustainable seed starting material, because I've used the cheap greenhouse, not the 72 ones, but 70, but like I don't know, they're 2 inch. It's like
Hmm.
48 to a tray. I've used those
Hmm.
forever and I try to reuse them, but they don't last for more than a couple years, and then they crack and then I'm throwing them away and they're getting stepped on and it's just trashy, right? So I was trying to figure out how I can produce less waste from my garden. And so when I came across your trays, I'm like, these are rigid and these are amazing and they're going to last forever. But I didn't realize until I talked to you this last October, like there's a whole science behind, like, they have larger holes at the bottom than what the other
Right.
ones do. And then you talked about the bottom watering. So why is that so crucial to have? Like, you were telling me how the other ones, I think it was the roots, or there was something there that I was thought
Yeah.
was really interesting.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of leads into the like we'll skip. Do you want to skip germination? We'll go right into that and then we'll talk about germination in a second. So
Okay, that's
yeah,
fine. Yeah.
what I was talking to you about was, and this kind of goes back to never use a 72 cell tray. So whenever we water plants, the tendency is to basically pick up that tray and dump water into the bottom, and the seedlings end up staying in that water a lot of times. Also, those 10 by 20 trays have these rivulets on the bottom that hold water. And what happens whenever water is readily available to a plant is it produces a taproot. It says, this is my water source. I need to put my resources toward using this water source. So the plant just assumes that that's its long-term spot to find water, and then it says send out a taproot. So I never want my seedlings in contact with water after watering. It's similar
Okay.
to outside. I mean, you got a spring shower and everything looks fantastic, right? The water doesn't stay there forever. If it floods, everything dies, right?
Yeah.
And so, but we're basically creating a flood in our seed tray if we're keeping our seedlings in water contact all the time. And so the bottom watering trays that we use have fins on them that elevate the tray. So we're wicking up water. But what I tell people, because whether or not they have the trays, is if you're gonna do once you do your bottom watering, you lift that tray up and you get it off of the water source. So you put it somewhere where it can be where air can be in contact with the bottom of the tray. And that goes for whatever item you use. Water it, get it away from the water, get it in contact with air if you can. And so what those large holes at the bottom, like you mentioned, not only does it make it so that you can really easily get the seedling out without hurting it, but it allows for air pruning. So um, on the flip side of watering correctly, instead of making that really long tap root, which is only for gathering water, the plant will focus on making feeder roots or these microfilament roots. And those are the roots that are in charge of bringing in nutrients to the plant. And we want as many of those as possible. They're super, super fragile. When a plant spends its time making a taproot, it doesn't have the resources needed to make, it doesn't have, it's spending all its resources on building that taproot instead to the detriment of those microfilament roots. And so then you have a plant that you're putting into the garden that doesn't have an ability to uptake nutrients very well because it's not poised for that. It's not ready for that. Instead, it's got a super long taproot. And you take that plant out, that seedling out, that taproot's hanging down. And then when you go to put it in the garden, you crush that taproot, and that equals instant transplant shock. So you don't
Mm.
have the good roots that you want. You have a taproot that you don't really want or need because its water source, it needs to go find its water source somewhere. And it's not going to be in the same place it used to be because you just took it out of the tray. Um, and so you don't have the type of roots that you need. And the only good root that you have, that tap root, gets crushed when you plant it. because you got to swirl it around because it's like
Yes.
8 inches long.
Yep.
And so
Been
if you've
there.
ever picked up one of those trays and you go, look at all these roots, you don't want any of those. You're better off cutting all of those off. So if you do use a different type of tray and you end up with tap roots, cut them off before you plant them.
Things I never knew. I mean, I've grown seedlings.
Yeah.
It's worked, but like little did I know. So this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
And
you told me that
preferably
in
cut them off
October,
the
I
day
was
before you plant them.
okay. Day before,
So they have time to get over the fact that you just cut off their root.
you amputated some
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay,
Exactly.
okay, awesome. Um, yeah, cool.
Any other questions on the watering? We can get
Yeah.
into some depth about packing the trays with soil and
Okay.
watering. Um, the probably the next logical thing is some stuff about germination, because germination is probably a big area where people get a little bit frustrated. Does it sound good?
Yeah, go for it. Yes, yes, yes.
So basically, like, so understanding what seeds need to germinate is the key to mastering the germination step. And so, for a seed to germinate, it needs warmth and moisture at the same time. So warmth and moisture at the same time. Uh, and one without the other leads to delayed germination or weakened seedlings. If they do germinate, or total failure to germinate, basically, you killed the seed. Um, and so to germinate seeds at a high rate, we need to keep them consistently warm and consistently watered together at the same time. And if you think about it, what you're mimicking is, if you think about spring, right? You get a nice spring shower. The ground outside has an ability to maintain a level of moisture consistently. So when it rains, it seeps into the soil and it's going to be there for days. And it might be there until the next rain, right? So the soil is well moist and at a really nice level of moisture for a long time. And then after that rain, you get those nice warm spring days. And now the seed has consistent moisture, consistent warmth, and what happens? Everything springs up out of the garden. You start to see your daffodils, you start to see your bulbs come back. Probably the weeds got there first, right? But everything starts to germinate when those two factors come together. And so mimicking, creating that environment, again, what we're trying to do a lot of times is look at what nature's doing and bring that into this controlled environment for best results. So what we want to do is get warmth and water consistently at the same time. That's the key to germination. If you do it at different times, then it's not going to work out for you. When I mentioned like why warming mats were a must. So
Yes.
germination, it's basically germination rate and time to germinate. So, if the seeds are good, assuming that the seeds are of good quality, they're not too old or they haven't been mistreated, right? A warming mat's going to give you germination rates at like 90+%. So that, if you've got a tray with 60 cells in it, and that, if you've got a 50% germination rate, that's the difference between 30 plants and like, 57, right? If you're at the high germination rates. And so it's just a lot more likely to germinate because you can control that warmth over a long period of time. If you think about the environment the seedling is in, it could be your kitchen, right? But,
Yeah.
maybe you just have a warming light and there's a lot of heat fluctuation there, right? Maybe it's on the kitchen counter. You turn the stove on and it gets hot, and then the AC kicks on and it gets cold. Maybe it's a nice day and you open up the windows and the cold air comes in. And so you're really throwing that seed tray into, and the seedling, what can happen is the seedling goes, oh, it's warm and it's wet. And then suddenly it's cold, and then it doesn't, you're going to get a weak seedling. And so the germination mat, the heating mat allows you to, as long as you're watering, allows you to basically keep that super consistent. And the time is basically, we can go with one of the big ones like tomatoes. So a tomato at 50 degrees will take somewhere around 43 days to germinate, but a tomato at 86 degrees will take 6 days to germinate.
Mm.
So the same
Yep.
tomato seed. And that makes a lot of sense because the tomato doesn't want to pop up too early. Sometimes you get a volunteer tomato, they seem to pop up at like usually a bit late, and you go, oh man, it's a tomato, it's not going to work out, right?
Yeah.
Because it's too late. You're never going to get to fruit. Well, its job outside isn't it's to get to fruit and then fall over and die and make more tomato plants, right? For us, we
Yes.
want to make a perfect tomato. And so getting an early start on germination with the warming mat will cut like the difference between you just doing it, say, on the kitchen counter. You get half as many plants, and then maybe it takes 14 days to germinate because it's around 60 or 68 degrees. And that's a whole week off of your growing season. So if I can get it to germinate in 6 days versus 14, then I've literally now a week ahead of time. And so that's the difference between for you putting a plant in that's this tall versus one that's this tall, because
Yeah.
it took, you spent so much time in the germination stage. So warming mats are super, super important. The key takeaway there is just seedlings need to be consistently warm and watered, and the best way to do that is with a warming mat.
Can you just restate the temperature? I think you said it and I missed it. Whether we're using a warming mat or we're just making sure the temperature of the room they're in is proper. What are we looking
Yeah,
at as in
so
terms of a
so
range?
the ideal range is like 77 to 86,
Okay.
and up to 95. I mean, some you don't get as much uh, reduction in days as the temperature goes up. 77 is kind of like where it starts to get really good. So, for example, the difference between like cauliflower at 68 degrees is 6 days. At 77, it's five. At 86, it's also five. And
Okay.
so, if which is, it's hard to keep your house 78 degrees. Who wants that? You know,
Sure.
I know we'd be turning on the AC if we were 78 degrees. Um, and so that's really where it needs to be, and that's a hard temperature to maintain. I mean, that's what the sun's going to do to soil outside, and that's why things will germinate on their own. But it's hard to
Which,
do
yeah,
within the home environment
that's why the
without a
warming
warming
mats
mat.
do make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, carrots
Yeah.
carrots are 10 days at 60 degrees and 6 days at 86. So really, in that,
Okay.
like, if I had to give a number to anybody, I'd say 80 degrees. What the warming mat does is it brings up the temperature about maybe 6 to 7 degrees, depending on the warming mat. And so
Okay.
if your AC is set at 72, then the warming mat's at 80, and that's what you need.
That's about perfect. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's
Yeah,
helpful. I think that's what gets a
yeah.
lot of people is not
It's not
realizing.
a
I know,
heater.
right, right. Just enough to
Yeah,
take the edge off.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's enough, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, any questions on germination?
I think I'm good. Yeah. I thought
Good.
that was super helpful. Yeah, I know when I first started, that got me because I had them in our basement and I didn't realize it needed warmth in addition to light. And so I was like,
Hmm.
why is nothing working? And it was just what you said. So I think a lot of
Right,
people miss that until later.
right. And the warmth and water, they're going to trigger that seed's response to start growing. If the warmth triggers it to grow and water's not there, it dies.
Mm,
And if the water triggers it to grow and the warmth isn't there, it dies.
yeah.
And so
Gotta have
that's,
both.
you really got to put both of them together. And so, that's why a lot of times you just stare into that tray, and then five survivors pop up and out of 30 because
Yes.
they got too cold or too dry. That
Yes.
number
Yep.
one killer inside a seed tray pre eruption stage before you see leaf, in the germination stage, number one killer is the lack of water. So they can never go dry. You really got to make sure that the soil medium has some level of moisture, just can't be completely dry.
Yes. So one question kind of to backtrack on the bottom watering topic, because I get sometimes people pointing out, okay, so I water from the top in my garden. We have sprinklers that come on instead of drip hoses and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and people go, no, you can't do that. But I'm always like, well, nature waters from the top. So can you walk me
Right,
through that? What are your thoughts on bottom versus top watering
right,
and why
right, right, right.
bottom's
So,
superior?
so nature waters from the top, but nature also dries from the top, usually pretty quickly.
Okay.
Um, and so, but nature also does things like freeze at the wrong time and burn. And so I don't
Good point.
necessarily, I'm mimicking nature a lot, but I'm also stewarding the garden, and so it's okay for me to make it even better. And there's a lot of opportunities to do that. So I bottom water in the tray, because seedlings are pretty fragile. If you were to plant seedlings outside and then a crushing rain comes in, they're most likely going to die, or they're going to be extremely weakened. They got to spend a lot of time recovering, and now you've lost a week in the garden, right? And it's similar in the trays. They're just very fragile at the early stage. Sometimes the seeds are really tiny, and I make this perfect tray, and then I dump water on top, and it washes them all around, and now I've got them stuck on the side instead of in the middle. And so there's some benefits of bottom watering there. Bottom watering, especially if you're doing it in an elevated way, it prevents overwatering, so that it can drain out. Um, when I'm first putting something out in the garden, for the first week and a half, I'm absolutely not watering from the top. I don't need the plant. I don't want the seedlings to have to deal with anything other than just making new roots and growing and getting off to a good start. And so I'm definitely watering at soil level for all of my new seedlings. And so we do water from above, definitely in the summer. By the time the summer comes around, all of the plants are well mature, and it's not going to hurt them for a drop of water. Sometimes you put in a new seedling and maybe it's dealing with a little transplant shock. You dump water on the top of it and it's just like laying down on the ground, and you're like, just survive. And I want to
Sorry.
avoid that. So I don't,
Okay.
when the plants are very, very young, I'm not top watering outside, and bottom watering within the seed starting process. Um, Helps the top level of the soil is going to dry out first, which is what we want, so that we don't have mold, mildew, and fungal issues. If it's over wet, we start to see mold, mildew, fungus, and then the seedlings have to overcome that if they do, which means that they're not growing when they're dealing with. It's kind of like when you're sick, and so we
Yes.
want to avoid that.
Okay. That makes sense.
After that,
Um,
we top water all
yeah.
the time, and so does the
Okay.
rain. You know,
Okay. Yes, that's
it's just
helpful.
in that
I
early
mean,
stage.
yeah, that question. When I had Austin from Homesteady on a couple episodes ago, and we were talking about that kind of fallacy of like, well, natural to a point where sometimes nature's a lot harsher and things die a lot more when we're, in that
Right.
realm.
I'm
So
trying to keep them alive.
yeah, acknowledge that, pay attention to that, but also go, okay, how can I steward, like you said? So great
Right.
answer.
Yeah. I
Thank you.
mean, if you think about it, when it rains and there's a nice breeze, you do the same thing in the inside and there's no breeze, and so you've
Yes.
got a lot of moisture retained on that, on the leaves. One thing that just while we're on it, one thing I never top water is tomatoes. I never water a tomato leaf outside in the garden. I'm
Why?
always watering at
Why?
soil level because
Is it
tomatoes do
for?
not do well with moisture.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Just
yeah. Um, we always want to keep tomato leaves dry.
okay. Good to know.
Hopefully, after it rains, the sun comes out real quick, and the more that happens, the more tomatoes you're gonna have, or the better tomatoes you're gonna have. Tomatoes
Awesome.
also really like kind of periodic water and then to be dry. Tomatoes do best where they get water and then they're dry.
Okay. Awesome.
So
Sweet. All
yeah,
right. Thank you for
tomatoes
answering
are the
that. I've
one
been
thing I
wondering
don't
that a
top
while.
water.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh, okay. So the next thing was once I guess we can talk about how to actually use the trays that we use, or really any rigid seed tray in general.
Yeah.
Uh, Once we've decided what our soil medium is going to be, and for us that's that coconut coir mix. I'm going to use the trays and I'm going to pack them really well. So you can't compress. The other thing I like, I guess, about that uh, store-bought thing, the coconut coir, is that you can't really compress it. I mean, you can get it once it's moist, it will hold its shape, but then it will immediately fall apart if you were to press on it. And so you really want to pack the trays well with whatever soil medium you're using, because roots like something to hold on to. Um, and so I pack them really well, and then I'm pre-moistening. I usually pre-moisten the mix so that when I do bottom water it, it doesn't pull, like dry soil doesn't fall out the bottom. If it's moist, it will retain its shape and won't fall into the bottom. And so I like to pack the soils really well. I like to pre-moisten, so that I'm not bottom watering basically when I'm seeding. I'm starting with moist trays, and then they go directly onto the warming mats.
Okay.
Um, there's probably a lot of questions around how often to water.
Yes, for sure.
Um, And the short answer is when it needs it, I guess. So
Yep.
never allow a block of soil to go completely dry. That's obvious. I've done it. I've walked in and everything looks like the poor unfortunate souls on Little
Yes.
Mermaid, right? I think we actually did an Instagram video with that song in the background. We had killed a whole sea tray, so it happens.
Yes.
But so never allow it to go dry completely. Dry to the touch at the top is a good thing. Dry to the touch at the bottom is not. So dry to the touch of the top is a good thing. Dry to the touch of the bottom is not. You need to definitely water real quick. Depending on the size of the seed tray module. So this one that's a little smaller is going to need water more often, versus this one's going to have a lot more soil in it, and so it's going to be able to retain water for longer. Um, we're watering as often as every other day, and as infrequently as every maybe 4 or 5 days, depending on the seed module size. So once you've potted up, you may only be watering once a week, as long as you're able to retain the moisture. If it's in a real windy spot, or if you're trying to toughen up your plants by having some kind of oscillating fan that helps them to create stronger stems, you may be doing some evaporative work there, and so you need to keep an eye on the water level. You'll get the hang of it. Basically, if you can go in just a quarter inch into the soil and you still feel some moisture, they don't need water yet.
Okay. That's a good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think probably another big question would be light. How much? light and like what the
Yeah.
positioning is.
Do
It
you, and I'd
so
love to know if you shut it off at night
I do.
or do you,
Yeah, yeah.
you do? Okay. What
I do
happens
shut it
if,
off at night.
how bad is it if you don't, maybe some person who shall remain nameless doesn't shut them off at night? How
I
bad is that?
mean, they grow food in Alaska with
Okay.
24-hour
Yeah.
daylight, and that's actually they grow a whole lot of food in a really short period of time because they have a ton of light.
Yes.
Yeah, so light. So there's probably a lot of questions around how much light seedlings need. Seedlings need more light than full-grown plants, sometimes as much as 16 to 18 hours. We run our lights on a timer, 16 hours on, 8 hours off. Plants don't need to rest at night. They'll just continue photosynthesizing with light, which is, I mentioned they grow food in Alaska really well because they have a 24-hour day, where the sun doesn't go down. There's a period in there where
Yes.
the sun doesn't go down. And plants love the sun, and so there's never too much sun. There could be too much dry as a result of too much sun, but there's no too much sun. There's just more of a minimum. And I don't like to have the LED lights on because they're kind of purplish and makes my house glow purple at night. So
Sure. Yes.
so I turn them off. So 16 hours on, 8 hours off, and later on, for you as you're potting up, after they've started to create maybe their first or probably their second set of true leaves, you can bring that down to about 12 on, 12 off.
Okay. That
Does
makes
that make sense?
sense.
So the plant
That's good to
starts
know.
out with those little dicot leaves, and they all look the same, and you're not really
Yes.
sure what it is.
Yep.
Once they start to make that true leaf, when they make that true leaf that looks true to its form. So on a tomato, like a rule of thumb for me is once I see that second leaf set, I could reduce that down to 12 on, 12 off.
Okay.
That makes
Okay.
sense. So they need more
Yes,
sun
it does.
in the earliest stages. Once they start to produce a couple of leaf sets, then you can back off some of the sun if you. The nice thing about the LEDs is they're just super efficient, and so the difference between going 16 hours and 12 probably isn't much on the electricity bill.
Yeah, that's a
Probably
good
talking a couple
consideration too.
months.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you want to keep
Awesome.
them long, you're not going to hurt them, but if you want to taper it off just because it bothers you that they're on so long, then you can taper it off to 12 and 12 after they've done those second leaf sets.
Awesome. Okay.
That,
I might need
that's
to,
uh, that's how we use them.
yeah. I have my lights in the basement, so it's easy to forget they're down there. I mean, if they were up in my main part, I'd totally shut them off at night because it would annoy me too. But I always forget they're down there and then I leave them on and yeah, probably could get
Yeah,
better
so
at
we
on and
just
off.
have ours. We have ours on a timer. We just have an external timer, so all of the uh, lights come into a single hub, and then that hub is plugged into the timer, so they're on and
That's
off
smart.
automatically.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very smart. Okay.
because I'm going to forget them too. I don't ever turn them on and off. I just let the system do it. And then the other thing would be distance. Like how far do you want the light away from the seedling when it's growing? The general rule is like you need 20 to 40 watts of power per square foot is ideal. So if you had a 4 foot space, then you'd want to have an 80-watt lamp or 80-watt grow light. And you'll see like some of the big commercial lights are as much as 200 watts, and they might be 12 or 20 inches from the top of the plant. But what we're using at home normally is 40 or 80, 40, 80 or 60. I use 80, 80 watt, 4 foot long. And so I have them as close as like 4 to 6 inches from the top of the plants. I don't want the plants to go searching for light. When
Yes.
they search for light, they get leggy. I want that light to be right in front of them so they just go straight up. And more light is better than less light. Another way that you can amplify light within your seed starting system is you can put aluminum foil on the back and side. So if you were doing it in a little
Oh,
cabinet and you had a grow light and you had one little tray, you could line a cardboard box with aluminum, put it around it. It's not that pretty, but that's a way to amplify light if you're using maybe a light that's not as expensive. If you wanted to get like a starter light and you felt like maybe it wasn't powerful enough, you can try to amplify light that way. In general, I would just say buy two instead of one so that you've got full coverage on the tray. So if you're going with a really small one that's $20, you probably buy two of them, and it ends up being 40 anyway, um, depending on the size. Because what you don't want is a lot of light on a certain part of the tray and no light on others, and so the ones on the outside end up trying to creep. They're moving toward the light, so we want some consistent light. Does that make
that's
sense?
a that does make sense. And I never thought about the aluminum foil trick, but that's super smart.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes you'll have some really nice plants in the middle, and then the other ones are all springy and long. It's because they spend a lot of time looking for light. And when
Sure.
they're looking for light and they're building stem, guess what? They're not building. They're not building roots. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. That
Um,
makes total sense. Things you don't think about until, yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me. I talked a little bit about doing amendment. So because we use that coconut coir, it's somewhat nutrient poor, and we use a micro life as the organic fertilizer that we use. It's a water base. We add it to the water when we're watering, and it's important to use the one that's for roots, for root production instead of foliar production in that early stage. And then if for you in a later zone, in a higher, a more northern zone where you're actually growing plants, see, I'm just growing seedlings and trying to get them in the garden as fast as possible.
Mm.
Um, you probably spend another, maybe 4 or 5, 6 weeks longer in the tray than I do, and so you're potting them up, and you're interested at that point in making leaves, and so then you want to switch over to a foliar one that's dedicated to foliar growth. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense.
So
Yes. Okay.
give them a root grower when they're trying to grow roots. Give them a foliar grower when you want them to grow leaves.
And that's even when you're
Uh,
using like a potting soil with fertilizer in it, that's to still go ahead and use
I
your
mean,
water based.
that's a tough thing to say because there's such a dramatic variety of quality in the store-bought products. If you've got one that's working and you're seeing positive results, maybe you never have to do an amendment at all. I'm always doing the amendment because we're using coconut coir and it's basically just a growing medium.
Yeah.
Um, and it's got some peat moss in it, or if you did a peat free one, they're probably going to substitute something else that's the nutrient base. Where it won't be peat, but it'll be something in there. But it's still short lived. I mean, it's not going to work for 3 straight months, right?
Yeah.
If you're using potting soil, maybe if it's got like a slow release kind of thing, then it's got plenty of nutrient base, and we don't want to over fertilize them. But if we're just using like a coconut coir vermiculite peat moss mix, which is what a lot of people do, then we may have to amend a little bit, certainly later in the process.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
prevent yellowing. Yep. Um, so that we probably got to the point. Do you feel like we covered enough on what we're doing while we're in the tray? Uh,
Yes.
the time that we
Yes. I
spend
think
inside.
that is, yeah, excellent. Yeah. Do you want to transition into like hardening off, how we get them into
Yep.
the ground without killing them? Because that's another pain point I know for a lot of folks.
Right. Right. So I think the number one thing to remember is that seedlings don't like change. They don't want change in temperature, and they don't
Like
want change
humans.
in. Yeah,
Humans
yeah.
don't like
And they don't
change
want
either.
they don't want change in moisture level. And so you got to remember they've been inside, they've been sheltered, they probably haven't had if you're firing on all cylinders and you got your fan going and you're really amping these things up, then they may do a little better. But if you're like most people, you're going to grow your seedling, and then maybe you don't wait as long to put them out there, or maybe you don't harden them off the way you're supposed to. But um, just remember they've been sheltered, and we want to start to slowly move them to the environment that they're going to be in. So number one, the best time to plant, in my experience, is in the evening. So what happens if we're planting in the morning is it's kind of cooler in the morning and then it gets really hot and then it gets cooler again. I'd rather have them in the evening so that they can spend their first 16 hours outside in a cool evening, a cool night, and a cool morning before the heat starts to slowly come up. And so if I don't have a bunch of time to harden off, every single time I'm going to plant in the evening for sure. And if I have time to harden off, or if I'm really wanting to do it, then I'm usually doing it a day for every 10, well, a day for every 15 degrees or so difference. And so if it's 70 outside and it's 85 or 70 inside and it's 85 outside, then I'm going to want to harden off for about a day, and I'll probably do that a day's time, and I'm probably going to do that over the course of maybe a little starter for a few hours in the best part of the day on day one, and then I'm going to double or triple that time on day two before they go to the ground.
Okay. That's a
And
good, yeah. That's a good rule.
hardening off can be the same day. As long as it's not too hot, if the weather's nice, you got to use your judgment. I may let them harden off in the morning, and they've been outside for 8 or 10 hours before I actually put them in the ground in that evening. Get them out there early, as long as I know that the weather's going to be nice. So I might harden off. I might have done a shorter hardening off period the day before, and then I might harden off during the day that I'm actually planting. It's rare that I'm going 2 or 3 days of hardening off. I don't think plants really need that much. In
Okay.
your later stages, again, the plants get set in their ways, and so it's a bit, you got to couch that a little bit for where you are. And so if it also may be dramatically colder in what you consider spring versus I mean, spring
Yes.
down here might be 98 degrees and we're
Oh,
like,
no,
oh,
no,
it's
no.
nice outside. Right.
Yeah.
And so you might be planting into 45 or 55 degrees, and that's a pretty big difference. So your hardening duration might end up going to a couple days.
Okay.
And you're just picking the best parts of the day to do that, and you're avoiding the bad weather. Um,
Yes.
I would say in general, if you've got really healthy plants, for the folks that are in like zones 8 and warmer, that hardening off may only be a day. Or you can, we've certainly, there's been times when we've gotten away with no hardening off because the seedlings are just really healthy.
Okay.
The biggest thing is just avoiding plant transplant shock. So yeah, hardening off is a definitely a best practice. Depending on where you are, you can get away with shorter periods.
That's good to know. I've
Um,
I've always thought it was like it had to be a week or it felt like this huge cumbersome
mm,
thing. So I
yeah,
like that you're saying it doesn't have to be that long. Not
I
always.
don't. We have personally never hardened off anything for more than a couple days.
Okay.
I mean, they're resilient. I mean, plants are resilient in general, and really, what we're trying to do is just give them the best possible scenario. But that doesn't mean that, if we mess up a little bit or we don't harden off long enough, they're all going to die. It's just if I can get everything to align just right, then we have the best harvest ever. But a few things that don't go perfect here and there, it's going to be fine. The plants are going to survive. For you, maybe hardening off is a 2 to 3 day tops. I don't see
Okay.
a scenario where you need to harden off longer than
Awesome. Okay, good to know.
that. Yeah, and so I'd say the number one thing, and really it leads to when I say that you know the, we want to get the plant ready for the new environment it's going to be in, and it's been relatively sheltered. Really, all that translates to is transplant shock. And what we're trying to do, the number one killer is transplant shock. We're trying to avoid transplant shock at all costs. It starts with the seed tray and the formation of that root ball and the ability to get that seedling out of that seed tray really easily without doing any damage. Um, it starts again with the soil medium. If I have chunky soil the roots can't hold on to, the root ball falls apart, right? Seed roots get moved and they're exposed. That's transplant shock. The root hanging down at the bottom that gets crushed,
Mm,
that's transplant shock. The drastic temperature difference, that's transplant shock. And really, planting is all about how to avoid transplant shock. And if I've done the best practices leading up into it, there's a lot fewer things for me to get transplant shock from. Um, one of the major killers when we're moving from the tray to outside is moisture. Never plant into dry soil.
yes.
That you can think of this like if you had water on the kitchen table and you took a paper towel next to it, what happens? The water moves to the dry spot and it gets sucked all up. And so if you put your seedling, you had that seed tray watered maybe the day before and the moisture level is just right, and you put it into drier soil, the moisture immediately leaves the root ball. And so the seedling says, I've dried out immediately, not in a gradual progression like it normally would over the course of the day as moisture leaves, but instantaneously, and it's instantly shocked. And so we always water the soil well prior to planting. So that's for us. That typically looks like watering in the morning, if it hasn't rained already. If the moisture level isn't where we want, sometimes it is. But if it's dry at all, then we're watering in the morning in preparation for that evening planting. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. It does. Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I've
So
seen that happen. So, yeah, the moisture I know is super key.
some early mistakes we made. We'd plant 35 plants and maybe we'd move on to the next bed, and then an hour later we'd come with the hose and water it,
Yes.
you know and for that
Been
whole
there.
hour
Yep.
those plants were like, what are we doing out here? And so now it's the soil is moist before the plants go in. We're watering, basically it's watering going into an environment that feels very similar to what it's been in, right?
Yes.
The
Yes.
other thing is soil density. So we use a trick where, so we've got this perfect root ball, the soil medium is good, the roots are undisturbed, we're able to pop it out perfectly, the moisture level in the soil as well is matching what it was in the tray. Because we do no dig gardening, we use a dibber to plant, and a dibber is
Hmm.
basically a rounded stick. We've got some really nice ones that I love. They're handmade heirloom items. You can accomplish the same thing with a stick that you want to whittle. You want it somewhat rounded. The benefit of using a dibber or compressing into the soil as opposed to spading out of it if you think about the way that a spade goes into the soil, what happens is it compresses the soil along the back of the spade. So this soil gets compressed. And then when you
Mm,
come out, what happens to the soil on the other side? It gets opened, like fluffed,
yes.
aerated. And then you put the seedling or you put your little plant in there, and the roots go to the easy soil and it produces a lopsided root system. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. I hadn't thought
So
of that.
when, yeah, again, you know, you can do that and it's not detrimental. It's like not like you killed the plant if you did it the wrong
Sure.
way. But again, here's another point. It's add two more points, and now we're at 97, right? Um, when I use that dibber, it consistently compresses the soil all around the entire cavity that I'm about to place the seedling into. And it's compressing the soil to a similar degree when we talked about unpacking those trays with soil. It's compressing the soil to a similar degree as the soil is compressed within the tray, and that seedling doesn't know it's been transplanted.
Okay.
So I'm picking the right
Fascinating.
temperature. I know. So I'm
Yes.
picking the right temperature. I've got the right moisture level. I've got no transplant shock. The soil is the same density, and the seedling just starts growing immediately. And we went back to time saving. So I saved a week on germination. I took care of the seedlings properly while they were within the tray, so they didn't have to overcome things like it got too dry and now they spent all their time healing, right? And then I put them outside, and rather than getting a week of transplant shock where they pause and don't put on new growth, there we see new foliar growth within 48 hours.
Yeah.
And so I've saved a week on the front end and a week on the back end, and that's 2 weeks of your growing season. And that's a dramatic difference between the tomato being at the right temperature and able to set fruit. So it's got flowers but no tomatoes because it's too late now it's too cold, or it's too late now it's too hot.
Yeah.
But I jumped the gun with my seed starting on the inside in a perfect environment. I put it outside and immediately started growing. And that's a big difference, especially if you're dealing with a shorter season where you're coming up against winter. That's
Oh,
important
yeah.
for
That's
you to
for me, that's
stretch your season.
huge.
Yeah, you have a
Yeah.
short season. 2 weeks is a
Yes.
game changer in your world, because we also never know when an early freeze is coming. So like, that
Right.
might be the difference between you're looking at the weather and now you have ripe tomatoes ready to harvest versus tomatoes that didn't. It took them. If
Oh,
only
yeah.
we had that extra
Totally.
week back. And so we're really extending the season with best practices there. Um, is
Okay.
that did I cover everything on actually putting them out in the ground?
Yes. Yeah, that's just those little details. Like you said, I think it's just you can do it without them, but just that's going
Right,
to up level for a lot of people if they can just start adding those
right.
little bits and thinking more and just yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So the next thing I'd talk about would be seed saving. I that's a whole nother topic, and there's books written on it, and so
Yes.
it's a little bit different for each type of plant. The way you seed a tomato or save a tomato seed is different from the way you save a jalapeno seed, right? Um, but in general, I'll basically just be a seed saving advocate, and I'll give you a couple of things that I think are important to understand about saving seeds versus purchasing them. It's a bit next level. So we still certainly buy seeds regularly. But one of the best things about seed saving is that you can do basically generational selective breeding within your own space. And so,
Yes.
I can go out there and I made these seedlings in the tray, and only the best ones went into the ground. The ones that got stuck in the little seed, I'm sorry, get over it. It died. I pulled it out. I know it's
Yeah.
hurtful. I worked hard for that thing. I hate
Yes.
to pluck it out. Or, I've got space for 10 plants and I have 20 seedlings. I'm gonna pick the best 10, right? So they've lived the
Yes.
best life. These are the best 10 plants. I put them into the ground, and one of them made the best tomato of the season. That's the seed I save.
Mm.
And that seed goes into my garden the next year, and it's that much better. The other thing that happens, and this is just part of the natural process of all plants, is it becomes hyper acclimatized to the place where you're growing it. So for me in Texas, it's my tomatoes are more drought tolerant than if I just buy tomato seeds, new tomato seeds. And I can do that season after season. So not only with seed saving, not only am I picking the ones that I like the best, that are already proven to give me results, and the best seeds went in, they made the best possible fruit. And now they can also deal with maybe not enough water because it's a bit hot here, or they can deal with it's a bit windy where I'm at. And so these plants will end up making thicker stems as a result. And so you'll get much fatter plants after multi-generational seed selection. You know, plants that are basically hyper acclimatized to they become the Jill Winger tomatoes, and
Yeah.
everyone wonders
Yeah.
like, well, what is it? Well, I've been planting that same cherry tomato. I've been planting a cherry tomato in succession now for the 7 years that we've been here. So, and I've done that twice a year. So it's the 14th generation of a cherry tomato, and they're filling up our whole neighborhood.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah,
What a legacy, though, as a home gardener. I mean, you
yeah,
could,
totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
go wild with that. I love it.
Birds eat them, and they're popping up everywhere.
Yeah.
Nobody has figured out
Infiltrating.
nobody has figured out it's me yet. So
Yeah.
now they're gonna know. Like, oh, that's where
Yes.
those cherry
Yes.
tomatoes came from.
The
Those things
world is
pop up
going to know.
everywhere. I I uh I tend to sometimes I seed them, and sometimes I just go pick the best ones that popped up on their own, and I put them in a row. I'm like, you're
Yeah.
ready. At this point, I don't need to selectively save. They're all perfect.
Yeah.
So that's
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 so
one that
cool.
I
Oh,
that I may or may not have to ever seed save again, but they're here every year. I guarantee they're going to be. I just don't know where they're going to be. So if
yeah.
I could play wild card tomato every once in a while with that
There you go.
particular. It's a coyote. It's a popular, very popular coyote cherry tomato, but I mean it grows in like bunches like grapes. It's unbelievable. Every fruit sets, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So, and that's just
Wow.
and I've got probably another 6 or 8 things that we do that with that are trailing behind it, but that one's definitely the leader. It's like this
Okay.
is where this thing grows. This is
Yeah.
the South Central Texas cherry tomato.
The
If
ultimate. Yeah.
anybody else had it, it would grow forever. And we're going to end up doing that with 30, 40, 50 different varieties eventually. When it comes to seed saving, so after selection, it comes storage, and then
Hmm.
there's probably just number one, it's worth some a small amount of research to figure out like how do you save certain seeds. A tomato is a great example. Tomatoes need to ferment before they will
Yes.
germinate well. And if you think about the way that makes a lot of sense because the tomato falls on the ground and it gets kind of rotten, and those they basically become fermented in the tomato, and then they germinate really really well. So you need to ferment your tomato seeds, which can be a bit challenging. You basically have to take all that pulp out and leave it, put a little cheesecloth in a mason jar and kind of let it get a little bit rotten, and then you clean
Yes.
them off and then you dry them. Seeds should be completely dry before they go into storage. So uh, I won't go into all the details of the different seed starting other than that tomato tidbit, but I'll let people research some of that stuff, or maybe it's a topic for another day. But
Yeah.
mostly just make sure that you understand the process for that particular seed saving, and then that the seeds are completely dried before they go into storage, which kind of leads into storage. So now that we understand what causes seeds to germinate,
Yeah.
we know,
Don't do
yeah,
that for storage
which is
situations. Yeah.
warmth. Yeah, no, it's really, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a full, it's once you start to think of it in this way, it really becomes a full circle kind of thing. They need warmth and they need moisture, so we got to avoid warmth and moisture. Um, if you think about, what causes them uh, to not germinate is the application of heat or moisture separately, right? And so if for instance your seeds are stored in inconsistent temperature like a garage or a shed, or some people use little plastic bins and then they've got all their seed packets in there, and maybe that's okay in the closet, right? Or maybe that's okay under the bed because temperatures are relatively consistent unless
Hmm.
you got a pier and beam house. It could get pretty cold
Yeah.
and then it gets pretty warm. And so seeds, you and I probably have a concept of what warm is, but seeds don't. Warm to a seed just means warmer than 5 minutes ago. All
Oh,
right.
okay.
If you
Okay.
think about it. So
Yeah.
if it's 65 degrees and suddenly it's 80 degrees for whatever reason,
Yeah.
that may trigger that seed's process to go, hey, it's time to grow. And then it's in
Yeah.
a seed packet, but there's no water. And that seed dies in that seed packet. And then you've got a seed packet with like 3 viable seeds by the time you use it.
Okay.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
Because we don't want to create that trigger event. It's the same reason I don't take seeds out to the garden. Like we've talked a lot about seed trays and growing inside. There's a lot of stuff that gets direct sown. A green bean grows fantastically by itself. Put it in the soil, poof, you get green
Yep.
beans. And there's quite a few things that direct so well. I prefer to do anything in a tray that I can do in a tray, which is almost everything if I'm avoiding transplant shock. But if if I'm planting outside, I'm never taking my seed packet out there. And the tendency is to
Yes.
take your green beans, and
Yes.
everyone
You
has
gotta take
done
the
this
whole
with green beans.
thing.
You
Yep.
take the
Yep.
whole pack, and you pour them
Yep.
into your hand, and then you set it down, probably on top of the soil that you just
Yep.
watered,
And then you accidentally
and the
spray
sun
it.
is beating down
Yes.
on it.
Yep.
The packet gets hot, and it gets
Yep.
wet, and then you're like, "Ooh, it's a little moist, but I'll just put it
It's
back
fine.
in the
It's fine.
tray, in the
Yeah.
rack," and it's literally
I have
wet.
never done that. I
Those
don't know why
seeds are
like, you're
toast.
calling me
I've done it
out.
100 times.
I know.
Yeah,
I do it every
yeah.
year.
Were
Every year.
were you
Yep.
there? Were you
I
there when I did
know.
that?
Yes.
Yeah, I have done that too, and I did. No, you don't think about it until somebody tells you. So
Yeah.
yeah, you basically want to avoid all heat fluctuations and all moisture fluctuations. A great way to do this on a small scale is to take like a Ziploc bag, tape it to the back of your refrigerator, put your seeds in paper seed packets, and drop a couple silica gel packets in there.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay. Yeah.
hmm I have a
Yep.
outdoor fridge, and that's where we keep our seeds year round. So the only fluctuation in temperature is when somebody opens the refrigerator door, and it's not enough to cause.
Yes.
And so you might keep seeds viable 5, 6, 7 years. It's a reason why they keep seeds in the world seed vault is in
Yep.
in the Arctic or whatever. Um, so there's no fluctuation in temperature. So you can kind of mimic
Okay.
that same thing. So avoid
Great.
all the things that make seeds germinate, and maybe overthink it a little bit if you're trying to do some seed storage. Like be pretty fastidious about not letting temperature or moisture get to those seeds.
Yeah.
So
Because
when
it's
I'm
so
when I'm
annoying when you're ready to plant and then you're like, oh, I had, 10% germination rate. I don't know
yeah,
why.
right.
So like if you can avoid that,
You
why not?
planted 12 and you got 3 and they're never in the right
Yeah.
spot either, and now you've got
Never. Nope.
unused space in the garden, and you got to start over, and now you're
Yeah.
back to that. I lost 2 weeks on my green beans because
Yes.
bad germination rate, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
Um, I think that's about it. We've got some exciting things coming up here, like I mentioned, the Victory Garden. So we've just laid out a giant 27 by 15 in-ground Victory Garden plot, and we're actually going to be going through the process of what a Victory Garden would have looked like, and so that's going to be kind of
Oh,
fun if
cool.
people want to follow along.
Yeah.
And all that starts with seed starting, and I think a great thing, especially for folks that are up north, this is going to come out, and we're going to be shortly after that. If this came out at around December, it is really kind of time to start thinking about seeding. We will be seeding pretty much immediately after. So we're going to go right into our deep dive seeding process on Instagram and YouTube, where people can actually kind of see some of these concepts that we talked about in practice,
Yes.
and the way that we
Yes.
do it at our house. And so they can kind of follow what we do and hopefully have similar success at whatever level they can do, whether it's a single plot or a bucket on the back porch, whatever it is. We can do it together. It's gonna be
Yes.
fun.
I love it. This may be the most thorough interview I've ever done.
Oh gosh,
You are
I
a
mean,
rock
I,
star.
I
Like
hope
this
it
is
doesn't get too
I love
long.
it.
I don't.
No,
I don't know who wants to watch an
no.
hour and a half movie of me blabbing about. There's somebody out there though.
There's some no, they will watch it. I know my people. They will listen and they will watch. But
Yeah,
I mean, I just love getting past like we all know that well not we all, but a lot of people have the basic info already, the standard, and I love getting into that deeper stuff that you're not hearing everywhere. I love the little tweaks you can make. So this has been fantastic. I think I
yeah, it's
said the name
it's
of
a
your
great
company.
format.
I said the name of your company incorrectly at the beginning. It's all about the garden, not all
Yeah,
about
all about the
gardening.
garden.
So just
Yeah,
FYI, guys. Um,
allaboutthegarden.com.
allaboutthegarden.com. And it's the same name on YouTube and Instagram.
Yeah, YouTube, it's small, so you have to put the little at sign. So you have to go at All About the
Okay.
Garden to find it.
Okay.
And then on Instagram, it's at All About the Garden Pics, because somebody
Okay.
has All About the Garden,
I know it's so
and they
competitive
won't.
on the names.
I keep
It's
I
so
keep
annoying.
asking them like, can I have the name, please? And they won't respond.
Yeah.
They probably think I'm
No.
crazy. They probably
Well,
think
yeah,
I'm
it's
crazy.
all
Like,
right.
why is this guy trying to ask me for? I've explained myself, and they just,
Yes.
it's frustrating. It's gonna be okay
I
though.
feel like it's
So all about the
rational.
garden pics
If
on
you're
Instagram.
listening to this and you own All About the Garden Instagram, talk to
Yeah,
Shawn.
it's just a personal. It's just a grandma. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just her and her friends.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
more power
Shawn's a
to her.
nice
She
guy.
got she
Make
got
a
there
deal with Shawn.
first. Yeah,
Yes.
she got
Yes.
there first. I'll send her
um.
some
Yeah.
plants or something or
There
some
you
seed
go.
trays. I'm willing
Yeah.
to barter. So,
I like it.
um,
I'd do it. So I'm just saying.
yeah. And then
Yeah.
I think we touched on it, but I'll definitely build that resource page for folks and get you can provide a link to that resource page, and we can go through some of these kind of hot topics. And
That
then
would be
that's
awesome.
also a great way for them to engage with us while they're there. They can sign up or they can email us, and we can answer questions here or there and kind of get them started.
Yes, and we're going to put that link in the show notes so you guys can click right over to that. I just want to say, like, Shawn is not paying me to say this. The seed trays are really good, guys. Like, if you're like, I've tried the egg cartons, I've tried the toilet paper tubes, I've tried the homemade ones, I've tried soil blocks, I've tried the cheap greenhouse trays. Like, these take the cake. They will last for a long, long time. I don't have to throw them away. I don't have to worry about it. And like we were talking about, the end result is superior. So they're worth the investment. Go check them out, all different sizes. But yeah, I
Yeah,
genuinely love the trays.
they're a total game changer. I'd say that when we were already getting pretty good at gardening when we started to put in this really kind of formulaic, repeatable process that it absolutely changed the way that we garden. Total
Yes.
success. It's
Makes
it's it's a it's
sense.
a
Yeah.
really big deal. Whatever
Yeah.
it is, you're just looking for consistency, and then that way you can make small tweaks and just get better and
Yep.
better at it.
Amen to that. And all areas of life, I think,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
gardening.
Gar
Yeah.
The good thing about gardening is there's like I'll never get to the end of it. It's just there's always something else to check out. And so
Yep.
maybe one day I can just garden full time. That's my dream, man. Like if I
That,
can
I think
just
that's a good
garden
goal.
all day long, yeah,
Yep.
that's where it's at. So, like I said, I'm trying to
Yes.
be my grandpa. That's it. One
Yeah.
day I'll get there. Hopefully I can get there before I'm actually a grandpa, but that's the goal, is just to garden all day long. Let's do it.
I think you're well on your way. So keep
I'm
on
getting
trucking. I
there.
feel like
I'm
I
getting
think
there.
you're
Yeah.
making good progress. Yeah.
Yep, I'm
So,
getting there. So,
oh my goodness. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This was fantastic. I can't wait for everyone to listen. Everybody, again, just go check out the resource page, because this was a lot of info for a podcast.
oh,
This
it's
is
a
a lot of
ton. Yeah.
information. Yeah. So he's going to have it all put links and all the stuff, the materials and tools he talked about. That'll all be there. You can check out the trays and everything else they have to offer. So, yeah, thanks again, Shawn. This was fantastic. And y'all, we'll talk to you on the next episode of the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.